Over three services with middle schoolers, we saw 22 middle schoolers pray to accept Christ last weekend. So there's 22 people that are helping make heaven more crowded. And then on top of that, high school is doing the same series. We're talking about the same thing because we're leading up to Judgment House together. They had 9 high schoolers pray to accept Christ last weekend. So yeah, we are in the business of making heaven more crowded. And then we've challenged you guys to think about Judgment House coming up and who you could invite to Judgment House. Somebody that you think needs to know Jesus and maybe doesn't know who Jesus is, and that God has a big family and wants a big family, and there's a place for them in his family. So we encourage you guys to write their name down and put it on the pray and invite wall back there. And last time I checked, there was 21 names on that wall. So good job, guys. Some of it said my teacher. It was just a whole slew of people. Some of his friends, some of his family. But it doesn't matter. Judgment House is not. It's something that you can invite anybody of all ages, except for under like 10 or so. But anyone younger than you, probably not. But anyone older than you, might need to know who Jesus is. You can invite them, put their name on the wall. We'll be praying for them and praying for you. But we're in the business of making heaven more crowded, and that's why we're here. If you put your faith and trust in Jesus, we talked about this last week. Our job, our purpose, our meaning in life is to tell people about Jesus and to let them know that there's a place for them in God's family. But it's kind of a funny title. It's a little bit of a paradox because we'll actually never make heaven more crowded, because Jesus told us in John chapter 14 verse 2 that there's more than enough room in my Father's home. So we're never actually going to make heaven more crowded. So it's kind of a fun way to talk about it. But there's always going to be enough room. There's always room for one more person. And last week our focus was on ourselves, okay? Let's talk about us. We all love to talk about ourselves. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't like to talk about yourself. But we want to focus on us because we wanted to answer the question, how can you know for sure that you're going to heaven? Because if we want to be a part of making heaven more crowded, right? We want to make sure that we are there first, kind of like the airplane. Put your mask on first before we're talking to other people and getting their mask on. So we want to focus first on ourselves and make sure that we know for sure that we're going to be in heaven. And we talked about how you can know for sure. And like I said, 22 middle schoolers and 9 high schoolers made that decision, and they can confidently say after last weekend walking out of this room that they know for sure they're going to heaven and why they know that they're going to heaven. But today we're going to shift our focus just a little bit, and we want to talk about other people, okay? I want to talk about this idea the fact that God has called us, Jesus has called us to go tell people about Jesus and tell people about God. So we've really been called by Jesus to go share our faith with other people. And I know when I say we're called to share our faith, there's probably some shared tension in that idea and in that thought. And I get it. I think that's perfectly normal. But I think the number one reason people will not share their faith is fear. I think that is the number one reason why people will not share their faith, is because they're afraid. They're afraid to. And I think fear keeps us from doing all kinds of things. I remember there was a quote I heard one time. It was talking about our success in life and the things we want to accomplish. And it was like, people don't accomplish these things not because of failure, but it's the fear of failure, right? The fear keeps them from even trying. So fear holds us back in so many areas of life, but especially when it comes to sharing our faith. And for you, maybe it's fear of rejection. You're like, I don't want to be rejected for this. You're like, what if I share my faith and nobody cares? Like, that will feel kind of, I'll feel a little rejected in that scenario. But you're like, maybe you're like, what if people just don't want to be my friend anymore if I share my faith? Maybe you have a friend who's an atheist or agnostic, or they believe something else entirely, and they have told you what they believe. You know what they believe. They know what you believe, and you just don't talk about it. And you're like, if I start talking about it, this person might not want to be my friend anymore. Or maybe I'll start talking about it, people won't want to invite me to things anymore. They won't want to hang out with me anymore because they know about my faith. You're like, I don't know if I want to deal with that. I don't know if I can handle the rejection if I share my faith, right? The fear of that can keep us from wanting to share our faith. Maybe it's the fear of humiliation. You're like, what if I mess this whole thing up? What if I make a fool of myself? What if I start sharing my faith and people ask me questions and I don't know the answer to those questions? You're like, I'm not a Bible scholar. I don't know the answers to most things in the Bible. Okay, what if I get in and people start asking me questions and I look like an idiot? Okay, I don't want to do that. And some of you, maybe you just feel like you have no idea where to start. Like, I don't know where to start. It's going to be clunky. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be humiliating. Okay, it's going to be embarrassing, and I don't want to face that. People are going to laugh at me. I don't want to deal with that. And the fear of being humiliated, sharing our faith, keeps us from doing it. Or maybe it's the fear of hostility, right? We live in a world that is openly hostile towards, and not just God and faith, but specifically Jesus, okay? If we're going to talk about Jesus, we live in a very hostile world towards Jesus. And maybe you've seen this play out. You have watched somebody else share their faith, and you watched how everyone kind of just like turned the hatred on towards them, right? You watch not just people get rejected, but maybe you watch people now go out of their way to make fun of this person and the faith that they shared. And you're like, I don't know if I want to deal with that. I don't know if I can handle being picked on because of this. And like you said, maybe it's all of the above. You're just like, I might be rejected, laughed at, and picked on for this, okay? Like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can share my faith. And if you're here today and for any reason, maybe it's not on this list I have here, I think there's lots of reasons we might not share our faith, but if for any reason you have not shared your faith, listen, I get it, okay? I've had lots of times where there was an opportunity to share my faith, and I didn't because there was something that held me back. This fear held me back. Maybe it was one of these things, maybe something else, but I think that's a very normal response. But here's the thing, guys. What if I told you that you could share your faith in a way that didn't have to be complicated? What if I told you you could share your faith in a way that you didn't have to worry about people asking you all the questions and you had to have all the answers? What if you could tell you could talk about your faith in a way that didn't lead to a theological debate? And what if you could talk about your faith in a way that you knew where to get started and knew how to navigate this? And the good news is, I think there is a way that we can talk about our faith. I think there is a way for us to talk about our faith in a way that's not complicated. It doesn't have to end in a theological debate, okay? And it doesn't really have to be all that scary. I think there's a way for us to share the good news of Jesus and to talk about our faith. But before I do, let me first tell you a story, okay? And I was about fifth grade, okay? I think it's around fifth grade. I'm kind of fuzzy on when this happened, but in third grade, my family moved we lived in town, so we moved from one town to another, and I went from living in the city to the country. And I don't know why my parents were like, let's do some country things. We live in the country, let's be country, you know? So at one point we had chickens, we had guineas, we had some goats, we had sheep at one point. I remember like watching shear the sheep, and I was like, this is crazy. We had a couple like cows. I raised a bull at one point, and one of the things that we had was horses. We had a couple horses. Actually, we had 3 horses. 2 of them were adults and were broken in, and then we ended up buying a colt, which is a young male horse who was not broken in yet, and the goal was that we were going to break him in. And so I had to learn how to ride. And so one summer, I spent an entire week at a camp learning how to ride horses. And I think it was a week long. It was all morning. We went and learned how to ride horses, and I learned how to like clean out the shoes and stuff, and like make sure their feet were good, and like brush them, clean them, like help maintain this horse. And then we learned how to ride, okay? And so I remember learning how to put the blanket on and the saddle and strapping it to the best of my ability, and someone else coming to help because, I'm like, fifth grade, I'm like, do I got this thing on tight? And then we got thrown up on these horses. Now, these were old horses, okay? So I got up there, I'm a little timid, I'm like, I'm on this giant beast, okay? And I'm like, I am small, it is huge. And so, they're like, all right, you got to kind of kick it to get it to trot. And I'm like, and nothing happens. So like, these are old horses. You got to kick them to get them. nothing. They're like, you got to kick these horses. I'm like, go, and it kind of like takes off a little trot. And I'm like, I'm doing it. You got to learn how to ride. You can't just sit up there and bounce, all right? You got to actually ride this thing. And so I did that for a week, and I felt like I was getting pretty good at it. And even towards the end, I think it was like maybe the last day or two, they were like, who wants to try bareback? And I was like, what's that mean? And they're like, no saddle. And I was like, let's do it. And so I tried it, bareback, no saddle, got up there. It was much harder, but I did it, okay? Kicked that thing. We were trotting around. I was like, I'm doing it. This is awesome. Well, camp ended, and I go back home. And I don't remember how long afterwards, my dad's like, do you want to go ride a horse? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we go out to where we have our horses and, put the blanket on the saddle, strap it as best I can. And then I get up on there, and we have like this little pasture. It's all fenced in. And my dad grabs the reins, and he's walking me out there. And we're walking, and I was just like, man, I'm used to trotting, I'm used to going a little bit faster. I can handle it. I've been learning how to ride a horse. I know how to ride a horse right now. I was like, Dad, give me the reins. I got this. And I don't remember if I had to convince him or not, or if he was just like, sure, go for it. But I imagine there's a little hesitation. Like, are you sure? Like, I know you've been learning for a week now, but like, are you confident you can take this horse and ride it? And I was like, yeah, I want to go fast. Like, we're just walking. I've been trotting for a week. I want to go fast. Let's do this. And so he gives me the reins, and nobody told me that on an old horse, you got to kick it really hard, but on a young horse, you don't need to kick it really hard. No one made that distinction for me. And so I'm like, got the reins, and I go, whop, on a young horse, and it just takes off like a bullet. My dad says from the back, my feet came out of the stirrups, and I'm just like, just hanging on, okay? And I learned how to stop it. I'm like, whoa, 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 and it's doing nothing. This horse is not interested in listening to me, and it just takes off to the barn, runs all the way, and it's like, I'm sitting up really tall. The barn's right here, and I'm like ducking, trying not to get hit, and this thing just like runs back to the barn with me on it. And I hopped off that horse, totally blame my dad. They're like, this is all your fault. Like, I am never riding this thing again. To this day, I have never ridden a horse, and I have no interest in ever riding a horse again. I don't trust them. They're big, okay? Even now I'm taller, but they're big, all right? I don't want to ride one, man. Then here's the thing. For just a second, I want you to imagine that you are me, okay? You're on the horse, and the horse is life, and my dad represents our Heavenly Father, okay? Listen, God wants to walk with you through life. He wants to be with you in this life, and he wants to help you, right? He's holding on to the reins and walking you through life. And too often we tell God, I got this, give me the reins. But here's the thing, God wants to help us. He wants to help us and to guide us. And when we're ready, he'll give us the reins and let us go. But too many times we're like, I want to go fast. I want to do it now. I want to do it my way. I don't want to wait on you. I don't want to wait on your terms and your time and what you got going on. Just give me the reins. And we end up making a mess of life. Now, what does this story have to do with the talk today? Basically nothing, okay? Except I just taught you something about God. I taught you something about his character and that he wants to be with you. He wants to help you in life. He will be with you in life. And I taught you something, a little something about human nature, how we all too often take the reins from God. We want to take control and we want to do things our way, and we end up making a mess of our life. Listen, I just taught you some truths about God and some truths about life, and I did it by telling you a personal story. Here's the thing. When it comes to talking about our faith, one of the most powerful things you can do is to tell your story, is to talk about your story, talk about what has happened in your own life. And I want to take us to a chapter in the Bible. This is John chapter 9. But you can, before you put that verse up there, I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory before we get to that verse. I want to show you. What's happening in this chapter, Jesus and his disciples are walking along, and they see a man. And the Bible tells us that this man had been born blind. So he'd been blind his entire life. And the disciples kind of kicked this whole story off by asking Jesus a question, kind of a theological question. They want to debate, okay? They look at this guy not as an object of mercy, not somebody who to go out of their way to show mercy to, but as somebody to talk about and try to learn some deeper understandings about life and God. And so they end up asking Jesus if this man was born blind because he had sinned, he had done something wrong, or if he was born blind because his parents had sinned, or someone in his family has sinned. Was he born, ultimately, what they're asking is, was he born blind because God was punishing him for something he had done, or something his family had done? Now, really, when you think about it, like that's not the case, by the way. Jesus corrects them and lets them know that is not, he was not born blind because of a sin. But wouldn't that stink? Like, wouldn't that be the worst if you were born blind or like paralyzed, or your ears didn't work, or something about your body didn't work, you had a bad heart, or like a gimp or something didn't work, right? And it was because somebody in your family had sinned, right? Somebody in your past relative, the grandparent that was no longer around, or great-grandparent, they had done something wrong, so God was punishing you. Wouldn't that just be the worst? But Jesus corrects him, and he's like, that's not the case at all. He's like, this man was not born blind because of anyone's sin. In fact, he tells him that this man was born blind so that God could get the glory. Not implying that God made him blind, right? We live in a broken world. Things like not being able to see and physical ailments and cancer, these things are part of a broken world. But he's saying because, right, we live in a broken world, this man was born blind, but God can work through his blindness, and you're going to see that God is going to get the glory from this man's story. So ultimately what Jesus does, he heals this man's blindness. But the way he does it, and he does it on a specific day. This day is the Sabbath. And the Jewish law, there was a rule that said that you don't work on the Sabbath. Now, the religious leaders had taken that law way too far, and it twisted it into something it was never meant to be. God showed us that he wanted us to rest and have a day called the Sabbath. And he showed us when he created the heavens and the earth. He created this world. He did it in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. Not because he needed to rest, but he was giving us an example to follow. Say, hey, there's a day of rest I want you to participate in. And so, but again, the religious leaders had taken it way too far. And Jesus, the way he healed this man, he like made some mud, just made some clay and like rubbed it on his eyes, told him to go wash. And the Pharisees were like, hey, that's considered work. You just broke this law. So instead of rejoicing and be like, what a crazy miracle had just happened, they bring this man in for questioning. And in fact, a lot of people didn't even believe it was this blind beggar, okay? They didn't believe it was the same guy. They thought maybe Jesus had like craftily switched somebody and like this was this guy's doppelganger or something like that. But eventually this guy, they finally are convinced this is the same guy. And he's like, hey, it's me. Like I am the blind guy. Like I'm the blind beggar that you've seen over and over again. Like I am that person. And they're just so fixated on how. They want to know, how did this happen? Give us the details. And he's like, I can tell you how this happened. Some guy came and like put mud on my eyes, told me to go wash, and I washed and I could see. And they're like, yeah, but how? And he's like, I just told you how. Like this is what he told me to do, and I did it, and I can see. And they're like, well, who is this guy? And he's like, I don't really know. It's some guy called Jesus, okay? And they go on, and eventually they bring this guy's parents in. They interrogate his parents. They're like, is this your son? Yes. Was he born blind? Yes. How did this happen? They're like, we don't know. Ask him. He's an adult, okay? They're like, leave us out of it. So then they bring this guy back in. Finally, they get to the point where they're trying to, I don't think they cared about the details. I think they had already made up their mind that Jesus was a bad dude and they needed to get rid of him. So they're just looking for a way to pin something on Jesus, something that they can get him in trouble with Rome, and then Rome will execute him for whatever. They're just like, we just need to find something. So they tell this man, they're like, listen, we know that Jesus is a sinner, okay? And they're just making stuff up. They're just throwing it all out there, hoping something sticks. They're like, we know he's a sinner. In John chapter 9, verse 25, we get this man's response. He says, I don't know whether he is a sinner, the man replied, but I know this. I was blind, and now I can see. Listen, this man is not baited by the Pharisees, and he's not baited into a theological debate about Jesus. He's not baited into talking about Jesus' character and who Jesus is, because honestly, at this point, he really doesn't know who Jesus is and know much about Jesus. He knows this information is way over his head. All he tells these guys is what he knew. He's like, all I can tell you is I was blind, and now I can see. And the only difference is I met a man named Jesus. And like I said, I think the Pharisees missed this because they thought they knew who Jesus was, and he was a bad dude. And so they're focusing on the how. We want to know how this happened because I think in their mind, the detail they were looking for, the slip up that Jesus made, or the thing that they could try to pin on him was going to be in the how. They already think they know who this is and who Jesus is. He's a bad guy, doing bad things. He's blaspheming. He's not the Son of God. How dare he, right? They're like, tell us how, tell us how, tell us how. And they get caught up in this how. And I think that's pretty normal. They focus too much on the how and not the who because I think they thought they knew who the who was. And again, this guy is just telling them, he's like, listen, I can't answer your questions of how. What I can tell you is that I was blind, now I can see, and the only difference is Jesus. And here's the thing, I think the world does this a lot. I think when somebody goes from being a drug addict to clean, people want to know how. How did this happen? When somebody's an alcoholic and they get sober, people are like, I want to know how. How did this happen? When someone's addicted to pornography and they get free from it, people want to know how. How did this happen? Right? When you see a girl who goes from one bad relationship to another bad relationship to another and just dates guys that just use her and are not kind, not good people to be dating, and all of a sudden they have this major life shift where they're by themselves and they're fine with it, or they're dating somebody that's like a really great person, you're like, how? What changed? Like, how did this happen? Right? Right, when we experience life change because of Jesus and people want to know how, it's a great opportunity for us to say, you're asking the wrong question. It's not how, it's who. You need to know who. And it's Jesus. I was one way, and now I'm another. Now I'm different. The only thing I can tell you is I met Jesus. Because to be honest with you, we're not going to know the how sometimes. Sometimes it's just like, I have no idea how this happened. All I know is I met Jesus, and Jesus changed everything. Listen, your story is the first and best tool for sharing your faith. Because again, nobody can argue it. Nobody can get into a theological debate about your story. You're just like, listen, I can't explain some of it, but I can tell you that I was one way and now I'm different. That's my story. And I met a man, and his name is Jesus. Paul did this all the time. And you can go, I'm not going to put it up there, but in Acts chapter 26, you can go read this for yourself. But there's several occasions where Paul tells his story. Paul is, at his time, he's probably one of the smartest guys when it comes to the scriptures. He would have had their Old Testament scriptures memorized, okay? He was the guy that other people who thought were smart were going to for answers, okay? Paul knew a lot. And yet Paul constantly refers back to his story. He says, I was called Saul, and I was on my way persecuting Christians. I was on my way to Damascus, and I saw a bright light. And a voice from heaven said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Lord, who are you? Who is talking to me? And it says, I am Jesus, the one who you were persecuting. And after that, I became Paul, and now I'm the Lord's servant, okay? Paul constantly told his story. Why? Because his story is powerful. His story would draw people in, and people are wondering, hey, how can you go from being who you were to who you are now? It's like, well, it's not how, it's who. I met a man, and his name is Jesus. Paul constantly did this. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, we're told, and if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it, okay? The best explanation for the hope that we have as believers is Jesus, right? We don't have to explain a bunch of how. We don't have to get into a theological debate. We don't even have to go back and explain creation and Noah's Ark and the flood and all these other things. We don't have to walk them through a biblical timeline and explain Moses and the burning bush. We don't have to get into all that. We can just simply tell them our story and say, hey, I was one way, and now I'm different, and the only thing I can tell you is I met Jesus. Jesus died for me, and I chose to put my faith and trust in him, and he's turned my whole life around. That's the explanation we have. That's the explanation for the hope that we have. Our hope is not in a what, it is in a who, and it is in Jesus. And it's one of the best ways that we can share our story, right? And I think it's just people are going to want to know the how. They want to know how it happened. How did you get free from that addiction? How are you different? How have things changed? And it's not how, it's who. Jesus has changed our life. So with the time I have left, I just want to give you guys a couple prompts that you guys can use to think about this and your story, your personal story, and how you can go out and share it. And the first one is to write your story, okay? Write out your story. Write out your story. You're going to get a little paper during small group time. You can do it during group, or you can take it home. But it's 3 simple questions. And really, it's just talking about what was your life like before Jesus? How did you meet Jesus? What was that moment like? And it's different for everybody. But and then what does your life look like now? For our team here at The Wire, one of our favorite things, one of my favorite things, is to get to meet with students who want to go public with their faith. They want to get baptized. They want to tell people their story. And those are 3 of my favorite questions. We ask, like, hey, tell us about your life before Jesus. Tell us, like, when you met him, what that moment looked like, and then what does your life look like after. And more often than not, they'll say something like, hey, I really wrestled with anxiety, and then I met Jesus, and now, like, I don't wrestle with it as much. Or I still wrestle with it, but I know I'm not alone in it because I have Jesus. Or they'll tell me, like, hey, I used to be really angry all the time, but now I'm not as angry all the time. Or when I do get angry, I know I can handle it because I have Jesus. Or like, hey, I didn't read my Bible that much. I wasn't that interested in all these things, and then I met Jesus, and now I am interested in these things because I want to get closer to the one who changed my life. It's really fun to hear people's answers. But write out your story. And I just want you to know, the moment you met Jesus, right, that question is different for everybody. I have a friend who celebrates his spiritual birthday. He knows the day that he prayed to accept Christ. Like the day, the time, the year, he knows where he was. He can tell you exactly it. For some people, it can be more of a season. It's just like, listen, there's a season where things just started to click and fall into place, and I started to know who Jesus was, and I just wanted more, and I wanted to follow him. And some people can tell you, like, hey, I think I was, 5 years old when I prayed to accept Christ. It's a little fuzzy, but I remember kind of doing this, and then the story built from there, right? Everyone's story is a little bit different. And let me tell you this. I've also met with people that will say, my story's boring. My story's boring. I prayed when I was 5 years old. I've been in church my whole life. I've been trying to, grow in my faith. I've never had, talk with adults who like, I've never been, the prodigal son. Like, I don't have a prodigal story. I didn't wander away. Sure, I've had seasons where, wasn't as strong in my faith, but I've never really wandered away. And I've always been close to Jesus since I prayed to accept him. Like, my story's kind of boring. Listen to me. That is beautiful, okay? Our stories should be boring. We should want them to be boring, okay? We don't want to tell the prodigal son story, okay? We don't want to be the prodigal. And I know that's a lot of people's stories as well. And so the story isn't like, look how bad we were, right? The story is look at what God has done. And there's so many people when I hear that, I'm like, their story's not boring. Your story's not boring. That's how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to find Jesus, and he wants us to find him as young as we possibly can and to stick with him. So to tell a story of finding Jesus and sticking with him is a beautiful thing. Beautiful thing. But write out your story. Practice writing out your story. And then secondly, practice sharing it, right? There's writing it out, and then there's sharing it, okay? Once you've got it written out, find somebody you're close to. It could be a parent, a grandparent, your small group leader, a close friend, somebody you're close with and comfortable with, and then tell them your story. Say, hey, this is what I've written down. This is what it was like before I met Jesus. This is when I met him. This is how that season looked like. And then my life now. And just tell them that. And they'll let you know, you can ask them, hey, did any of that make sense? Was I all over the place? Like, how did I do? How did I do to share my story? Practice it. Practice it with someone or practice it in front of the mirror. And then lastly, I just encourage you guys to pray for an opportunity. Pray for an opportunity to share your story. Because listen, if you will write it out, you will practice it, and you are prepared. 1 Peter, right, chapter 3, the verse we just read, that says, be ready to share the hope that you have. If you are ready, I promise you, God will give you opportunities. I promise you, you'll find yourself in the most random moments where somebody will say something, and you're like, oh, snap. I think this is the time and that fear is going to set in. But listen, push past that fear, share your story, look for people who are hurting and who maybe your story will connect with them and help them. Because I promise you, your story is the first and best tool for sharing your faith. And if you practice it and you're ready, God will bring you opportunities. And listen, I would love to tell you that John chapter 9, that the guy didn't face any pushback for sharing his story. I think ultimately it worked out well for him because he ended up with Jesus. But to be honest with you, there's a chance that this guy was excommunicated from the synagogue, wasn't allowed to go to church anymore. There's a chance he might have lost his family and friends. And there's a chance that he would have been looked on by the Jewish people as kind of an outcast, as a sinner, because he sided with Jesus. But here's the thing. He ended up with Jesus. He ended up with a great life, and we're still talking about his story thousands of years later. And I promise you, he is part of making heaven more crowded. It worked out just fine for this guy. But listen, I want to share with you John chapter 9, verse 35. It says, when Jesus found out what happened to this man, it says he went and found him. So Jesus heard, somebody told him, hey, you know that guy that you healed? He got interrogated by the church leaders, by the Pharisees. He's actually, he stood up for you, sided with you, like he did a great job, and they've kicked him out. He's no longer got his friends and family around. His life is all over the place. It's in pieces. And Jesus went and found him. Listen, I promise you, if you will be brave and share your story, Jesus will come and find you. He will be with you in it. And Jesus also told us in his Gospels that if we will acknowledge him publicly on earth, he will acknowledge us before his Father in heaven. Listen, great things come from sharing your story. Great things come from sharing your faith and talking about Jesus. And sharing your story is a great place to start. If you don't know where to start with your story. If you're worried about a theological debate, start with your story. If you're like, I don't know all the answers, I don't think I can answer all the questions that are going to be rapid fired at me possibly, share your story. Man, just share your story. It's powerful. Stories are powerful. That's why you'll see Jesus telling stories all the time to illustrate a point. Because stories catch our attention. They draw us in. Your story is captivating, and somebody will listen. And somebody will listen, and they will hear your story, and their lives might just be changed because of it. Your story is powerful, and I encourage you guys to practice sharing it. Let me pray for us real quick. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your son Jesus, and for those of us who have put our faith and trust in Jesus, we have an incredible story to tell. Whether we were the prodigal son and have come back, or we claim to have the boring story and we never left, both are beautiful because they show your love for us, and they show just how you work in our lives, and the power that can come from putting our faith and trust in you, and the life change that can come from it. The best life is found with you and with your son Jesus, and we want to tell people about that. We want to tell people how they can be free from some of the junk in their past. They don't have to feel the shame, the guilt, and the condemnation from it anymore. They can be free from that. They can be a part of God's family and a part of making heaven more crowded. And that is a beautiful thing. And we want people to be a part of your family, God, and to know that it's open to them. And our story is a great place to start. So help us be courageous. Help us to do this, because I know it's fearful and it's challenging at times. And it may not always go well for us, but that's okay. The Bible tells us that when we do and it doesn't go well, we're storing up treasures in heaven. You see us and you'll come to us. You'll draw near to us, and you've got us. So help us just to trust you with this, Lord. We love you so very much, and we just ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.